an environment where hundreds of thousands of kids don't feel safe. They're not going to go to school. They're not going to get a job. They're not going to start a company. And so I guess it's that conviction that if we are successful, everyone has a chance to be prosperous. And it doesn't matter where you were born. If everyone has that equal level of safety, we all have a chance to dream for what we might be able to do.
Welcome to another episode of Outsider Inc. I'm your host, Ian Hathway. Today's guest is Garrett Langley, founder and CEO of Flock Safety, one of the most consequential and closely watched technology companies being built in America today. Flock builds public safety technology, including license plate recognition cameras, drones, gunshot detection, and real-time intelligence tools used by cities, law enforcement agencies, businesses, schools, and neighborhoods across the country. Its mission is as ambitious as it is provocative: to eliminate crime. Garrett's story is also a distinctly Atlanta story. He grew up in a city known for institutions like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, UPS, and Delta Airlines, not necessarily as a place where venture-backed startups were the obvious path. But after Georgia Tech and a career that included 2 significant exits before he was 30, Garrett found himself searching for work that felt like more than another conventional win. With Flock, he found it. Today, Flock operates in more than 6,000 cities across 49 states, was recently valued at $8.4 billion, and by Garrett's own estimate, helps solve or clear more than 1 million crimes per year. It's a company that has grown far beyond what many investors thought was possible, in a category that sits at the center of some of the hardest questions in technology: safety, privacy, policing, trust, and civil liberties. In this conversation, we'll talk about how Garrett discovered entrepreneurship, what early success did and did not solve for him, and how Flock grew from solving local problems into a national public safety platform. We'll get into the realities of building hardware and software for one of the most scrutinized categories in tech, the weight of the responsibility that comes with that scale, and what it means to build a company of this magnitude from Atlanta. Garrett, welcome to Outsider Inc.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Thank you for being here. It's great to see you as well. I'm excited to get into the full story of your journey in a moment, but I'd like to kick things off on a more philosophical note first. Most founders are driven by ambition or a sense of purpose, this thing they want to build, this problem they want to solve. And I know that's true for you too, but you've also described running Flock as something different. You said at times it doesn't feel like an honor so much as a burden and a responsibility. And when you think about what Flock has become, technology that communities and law enforcement agencies in thousands of cities now depend on every day, that framing makes a lot of sense. So I want to start there. What does it feel like to carry that kind of responsibility rather than simply being driven by it?
Really good question. The thing that I try to focus on, and we talk about internally as well, it is a privilege and a choice. I choose every day to take that burden on. And so do my colleagues. We've got 2,000 or so people at the company, and they could go work at a SaaS company that helps salespeople close more deals. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the consequences are close to zero for screwing that up. And there are certain people in this world, and I guess I put myself in that bucket, who just, that's not enough. It's not enough. I want to have a bigger impact on people's lives. I want to have a bigger impact on my kids' lives, on my community. And I think some people, when they have that calling, they choose to run for office. And you look at some of the most successful political figures in our history, and they weren't career-long politicians. They were people that had this burning desire to do more than maybe you and I wanted to do in terms of impact and influence. I just happen to have a degree in electrical engineering. Technology is my avenue to that impact. But I think to your point, there are plenty of days when you go, man, is this worth it? To have this many people not like what you do for a living. And I spend a lot of time with elected officials, and they deal with the same consequences. You think about like being a governor or being a mayor of a small, medium, large city, and that's not a long-term livelihood. So you're doing it most likely because you actually want to help people. And if you think about the most successful mayor in America today is Mayor Lurie. You know, the highest approval rating. he's in the low 70s. That means if he went and met 4 people, one of them still thinks he's garbage. And if you think about the average mayor is in the 50s, best case, 40s, that means that you walk into a room and half the room thinks you're doing a horrible job. That's crazy, right? When you were a founder, imagine if half of your company thought you were a horrible CEO. How would you be motivated to go to work? The only way you can be motivated is was you actually believe what you're doing is good for the world.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it. At the bottom of my gut, of my heart, I believe that everyone has the right to be safe. And I don't think it should be a privilege. I think everyone should have the same level of safety in America. And a lot of people disagree with how I'm doing it. And my big pushback is I'm doing something though. I welcome other people to do other things, but you can't just complain on the sidelines. You got to go do it. Go run for office, go build a company too. It's a consequential topic because it impacts millions of people every single day.
I appreciate you sharing that perspective. Obviously, if you're going to do something impactful in this world, you're going to ruffle some feathers, right? It's interesting you brought up politicians, including governors. Actually, the last guest on the show was Governor Jared Polis from Colorado. Although he was a very successful entrepreneur before the age of 30, as you were as well, he had this through line of public service, studied politics in undergrad and had been on school boards and actually founded a couple of charter schools in Colorado before he ran for office. The through line for you, I see, is this larger sense of responsibility, this mission to improve the world. I think we're going to see that as we navigate your journey in this episode. But before we do that, I'd like to go back to the beginning. You grew up in Atlanta, Westminster Schools, then Georgia Tech. The Atlanta you grew up in wasn't exactly the startup hub that it is today. It was Coca-Cola, Home Depot, UPS, legacy institutions. You've said before that you had no idea people even started companies, that when you were young, you assumed that everyone went to work for someone else. And yet somewhere along the way, you figured it out. Something sparked. You were just a kid when you started your first computer repair business, and your mom really became your first employee, driving you around to clients' houses because you weren't old enough to get there yourself. So before you knew what startups were, where do you think that instinct came from? That instinct to solve a problem, sell the solution, and turn it into something that people would pay for?
To your point, you look at Atlanta even today, the last IPO of true materiality, which like led to more companies getting started, was ISS in 1999. It was the last IPO for Atlanta. Now, there's been other technology companies that have gone public, but not that led to other ecosystems where you develop this mafia or this new group of entrepreneurs, this new cohort of investors. So like Atlanta, we still have a long ways to go. But I do think, to your point, if you go to a T-ball game and you survey all the parents what they do, you're right. They work at Coca-Cola, they work at Home Depot, they would work at SunTrust or Wachovia. Like they had normal jobs, right? That's what most people do. The concept of an entrepreneur was and still is not a common thing. And my assumption was that everyone just got real jobs. You go to high school, you go to college, you get a real job. Both of my parents worked pretty much at the same company their entire professional careers. And I think for me, like early on, my brother and I were expected to either play sports or work in the summer, starting in 6th grade. And so I tried the whole like mow people's grass thing. So I wasn't that into sports. Quickly realized I didn't actually like mowing grass that much. I don't want to mow grasses. I don't want to babysit. That wasn't something that was going to make sense as a 13-year-old. But I loved computers. I really loved computers. And what I noticed is that like when I'd go to my friend's house, their parents would ask me to help fix their computer, set up a Wi-Fi network, which back in, was that, I guess, 1999, 2000, that was like a big deal to get Wi-Fi. And had the spark of, well, instead of doing this for free for my friends' parents, what if I just started charging people? And so a bit of like I had to create my own job to avoid mowing grasses all summer, and was fortunate that I liked people, I liked technology, and there was quite a bit of demand for an at-home type service.
Well, so this is like a good lesson here, right? You're following your nose, but you are a product of your environment. What's going on around you does affect you. I know your parents, both of them, you mentioned, were a part of your foundation, that your mom in that literal sense, and your dad, as I understand it, spent his career in field sales, selling
Yeah.
industrial rollers. I know before you've talked about how everything you learned about managing customers, managing employees, managing relationships was through him. So I'm curious what you learned by watching him. Was it how he built trust, how he handled rejection, how he stayed close to customers over time, or what parts of his approach still show up in the way that you lead today?
What makes him really unique is he genuinely cares about people. And if you think about the polar opposite of that, what's the most transactional sales experience you've had? Maybe buying a car. They know I'm here to buy a car. I know that they're here to sell me a car. There's no relationship that needs to be built. I'm just going to try to get the best price. And you're going to try to sell me the most things that have higher margin. There's financing. And there's no even space to have a relationship. And my dad was selling rollers, right? Literally to keep the factory running. Yet I think he genuinely cared for people and viewed sales not as a means to make money, but as a means to meet more people. So when your North Star is not, I'm just trying to hit my number this quarter, but what a cool thing. I get paid to meet interesting new people and talk to them and get to know them. I think people can read that. I'm not as far on that spectrum as I wish I was like him. But when I meet customers, when I meet potential employees, I try to channel that genuine sense of what a cool thing that I get paid to meet people. For me, that's probably the most interesting thing of what my dad was able to kind of instill in me is this, you don't approach the relationship from one of genuine curiosity and genuine interest in their life and their goals and their needs. You just wind up looking like a car salesman. And I think that motif has existed for a long time for a reason.
That's a great take. I agree. Obviously, building my business that way, but also as hosting this platform. This will be our 28th episode. And I was reluctant to do this, honestly, but I see this as part of my mission is to tell these founder stories. And I just feel so lucky that I get to meet these people, learn about their lives, and then share those highlights through their own words with our listeners. So can definitely relate to that and following opportunity. And so right out of high school, you connect with a group of Georgia Tech alumni who had already taken a company public and were starting another one, a mobile commerce startup called Firethorn. You join as their fifth employee, where you essentially get this masterclass upfront in how to build a company before you ever tried to build one yourself. That company gets acquired by Qualcomm for over $200 million. Next, you go on to co-found Experience, a mobile platform that let fans upgrade their seats and access VIP experiences at live events. That gets acquired by Cox Enterprises for over $200 million. You're still in your 20s. By any measure, you had made it, right? But you've described that as a sort of quarter life crisis. You hit goals that you'd set for yourself earlier than you had ever expected. And instead of satisfaction, you felt a little bit lost. Now, we have heard this repeatedly from guests on Outsider Inc., this identity crisis that sets in after an exit where suddenly you're no longer this founder of the company and you're not quite sure who you are anymore or what you want to do. Tell us a little bit about what that moment felt like for you.
So I met Tripp and Derek and Ben when I was 18. And my whole advantage was like, I want to be these guys, right? I want to start a company and I want to sell it. And then you do it. And there is a common saying, but I think it rings true, which is if you are so focused on the end goal and cruise past the experience, you're going to be kind of bummed out when you get there. And taking for granted that experience left me at a point where when we were at the conclusion and we no longer owned the company, right? We had sold the business. I was a free agent. I have no idea what to do with my life now. Do I want to go do this again? Is that going to be fun? Will it be fun to literally do the exact same thing for 10 more years? That feels kind of crazy. And it went through this very fascinating life discovery of what it is that actually makes one happy, and interviewed at big companies like Home Depot and Coca-Cola. Never thought about being an investor, which is kind of interesting. That never crossed my mind. Knew I wanted to work, put my hands on something. And what I wound up realizing was I don't like sports, but we built a business in sports. I could care less about financial services, but we built a company in fintech. What made those businesses fun was the people. Genuinely loved spending time with the people that we were building the company with. And that was the eureka light bulb. The whole joy for me of being an entrepreneur was having control over who I get to work with, who I spend 100 hours a week with. And so very quickly realized, like, yes, it's not that I want to go start another company. It's that I want to have control over who I spend time with. And the only way to do that professionally is actually to start a company. So I called Paige and Matt and was like, I don't care what we build, very open to lots of ideas, but the three of us should build a company together. And obviously hindsight's 2020. This one, it was a good team. It was the right people. But that was just aha for me, was realizing that I cared really deeply about people versus product or market.
That carries us into the Flock origin. Your uncle, who you've described as a close mentor, basically said, don't go build another dopey business.
Yeah.
I think you said that in your own way. I want to do something with meaning, and I want to do it with the right people. And I like this idea of building something that you'd be proud of to spend maybe the rest of your life on building. I know that you tested a bunch of ideas, and then something maybe sort of random happens. Your neighborhood gets hit by an organized crew breaking into cars. You go to the police. They're basically hopeless and maybe even apathetic to what had happened. But you're an engineer. And so instead of just accepting that, you start asking why. You start asking questions. Eventually, you learn what the police really needed was a license plate, something concrete enough for an investigation to move forward. So you and your co-founders go back to your dining room table, tear apart some old Android phones, solder together a battery and a solar panel, and essentially start building the first Flock camera by hand. Take us back there from that search for the next business to the night your neighborhood got hit and the moment that you felt compelled to start building something that could help lots of people.
I think every entrepreneur has their why. And like I said, my why was the team. And so Paige and Matt and I knew we were going to do a business together. We had a bunch of ideas. And Matt is really passionate about music. And so he wanted to do something in music. And I reminded him that no one actually makes money in music. Spotify is like the 1 out of 1,000,000 startups. We should pick a market where people spend money. Paige's father was an orthopedic surgeon. And so we spent a lot of time looking at medical equipment, med tech, built some prototypes. It's like we had all of these prototypes being developed, right? And we did build a music app. We built this physical therapy device. And then out of all of those, to your point, there was this one idea of what if we could build a camera that actually solved crime. And in my experience, that's probably, maybe we should have picked a better name for the company. We said, oh, we're going to go build a company focused on sports. And it took us probably 12 months from that to a paying customer. And I would call that not that uncommon of finding product market fit. You got to go understand your customer. Like there's plenty of examples, Figma included, where it's like, it just takes a long time in that kind of journey in customer discovery. But at Flock, we had this idea. I have the email that I sent to Matt and Paige framed in my office, idea for neighborhood safety. We built that and we had our first paying customer the same day. From the idea that I sent that email, we cold called, got a paying customer. And then about 2 months later, we had our first success from a product perspective. We had our first arrest. And in hindsight, I try to tell other entrepreneurs that I meet, as someone who has started 3 companies now, that is not normal. It is normally really painful to go find repeatable revenue. And Gary Tan was my first institutional investor. He made the joke like, man, you have product market fit for the world. Everyone wants to be safe. And you've built a product that actually makes people safer. TAM's not our problem. I know we're going to have a lot of other problems in this business. I don't think TAM is the problem. We did not want to be a hardware company. We did not want to be in public. We didn't want any of this. But the idea made so much sense because if you think about it, every existing product related to safety is focused on you as an individual. But when your neighbor's home gets broken into, your sense of safety goes down. Yet every single safety product was for your home, your apartment, yourself, when the actual problem was a community problem. And so I think the secret that we held quite closely was realizing that you needed to move way past the house. You needed to move to the neighborhood. You needed to move to the city. You had to make the impact there because in an environment where safety solutions are only built for the individual, safety is then a privilege, not a right. Because if you can afford a gate, you buy it. If you can afford a security guard, you buy it. Those are privileges. And our whole thesis was if you focus on the community, it becomes an equalizer. Everyone has the same level of safety and it's a very high level. And that gets my blood pumping pretty fast. That is something worth building.
Well, I want to double click on that, and especially something worth building. When we started out, you said privilege and choice. You just referenced privilege. I want to talk about a choice you made. I heard the stories about that initial customer. DeKalb County detective calls you up. You went on the 5 o'clock news. Like, what an amazing way to reach customers.
People should use local news more often. It's a really good channel.
Free media, right? Free advertising. But it's a difference to go from, hey, we helped solve a crime, and hey, we have potentially some early customers and a unique way of reaching people. There's a big leap between that and deciding to go build a scalable solution around this problem. So what made you so sure that this was a leap worth taking?
We wound up doing Y Combinator. And when we got into Y Combinator, we had one paying customer. We did not have a crime solved. So we were at, let's call it 3,000 of ARR. And we think we had this goal of we want to get $300,000 of ARR. So, I mean, YC does a good job of pushing you to see how hard you can go in 90 days. And nothing was working. The camera didn't really work that well. It kind of worked, but none of us had built a consumer grade electronic before. I hadn't touched a circuit board in more than a decade. Matt had never done firmware, and he was trying to do all this stuff on firmware on the edge. And this is before AI was a thing. This is when we called it machine learning. He had never done that. So the camera wasn't really working. Paige and I were outbounding all these neighborhoods. And man, was that first customer just a total fluke. The week before demo day, we had gotten to $21,000 of ARR. So we had, let's call it 5 customers. And I was like, maybe we should pivot the company. Maybe we should do consumer. This isn't working, guys. Mm. And to your point, that week, we solve our first crime. We go in the 5 o'clock news, and it starts to work. And I'll never forget, we were debating how are we going to raise money for this company, because I knew that if we were going to build a successful company, we were going to have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, right? If you look at every other hardware company before us, you don't do it on $10 million. And like, you're also not going to raise $100 million in Atlanta. That's not happening. There isn't a single investor in Atlanta that's going to underwrite spending hundreds of millions of dollars in a single company. It's just like, that's not the market that I live in. So no, it wasn't obvious. We were like days away from just totally pivoting the company. We were going to be embarrassed going into demo day with such little traction, no real product success. We had very little to show for ourselves, and then got very lucky that when we needed it most, we had that success. We had a very unique go-to-market motion that people didn't believe was going to work and scale. And we were like, the 5 o'clock news is on every night in every city in America. And now we're covered in the media probably a couple hundred times a day. That is still our dominant channel.
Yeah, for better or worse, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So things weren't working. Then they started working. You caught a break. ARR's climbing from a few thousand to 7 million in recurring revenue in just a short amount of time. Then you're going out to raise your Series B and face another setback. Most VCs won't even take a meeting with you. Too many strikes against you, right? Atlanta, hardware, law enforcement, no thanks.
Yeah.
And you're down to just a few months of runway. Employees who believed in you enough to leave great jobs are counting on you. And only a couple people inside of the company knew how close you were to the edge. That experience feels quintessentially outsider to me. Knowing that you're building something important while much of the market can't see it yet or won't validate it. So just walk us through how dark it actually got for you during that time period and how Flock survived.
It's funny because we have such selective memories. I've deleted that entire chapter out of my normal brain. I only remember the good stuff. And I'm thankful to have a very supporting wife who reminds me of the bad stuff, because when I have a bad day, she'd be like, well, as bad as that day? I'm like, that's a good point. It wasn't that bad. So no, I mean, it was pretty scary, right? I had made a bet the company type decision to enter into the law enforcement market, which is not a market that VCs have crowded. The last company to go public in that space was back in 2005. This is now 2020. No one thought government was a good market. No one thought Atlanta was a good market. Hardware was a good market. Our growth was really strong. And that was probably the weirdest part to me, is we had gone from 1 million to 7 million of ARR in a single year. Nowadays, maybe that's not fast, but that was really fast at the time. And just no one liked the company. It was not fun. Paige and I sat down in our office. We shared an office at the time. And just pulled up a spreadsheet and we're like, we have to dramatically change burn. We need to cut staff. We need to stop everything that's not working and just like really narrow the focus. But I do think when companies go through that type of shock, when you do get to the other side, you tend to be a lot stronger. It's not fun to think about, but I also think this is why who you work with matters so much. Because man, it was tough, but doing it with someone other than Paige and Matt would have been a million times worse. Because at least I knew the three of us were going to figure it out. Like worst case, we go back to just three of us in a garage, but we did it. It took us probably a year to bounce back. We cut staff pretty dramatically, but I kept traveling and selling. This guy Bailey kept doing the same. And eventually, like the results got too good for people to ignore. So we were able to kind of keep growth going despite the setbacks. And eventually we were able to get our Series C done and start to really go after the market that I knew we could. So we just kind of took a year off the companies where I thought we could have been. So in hindsight, it's not that bad.
I think if you have a good team and family and friends of support and you just keep going, you can get to the other side. You did. Obviously, Flock is a dramatically different company today from the one that almost ran out of money. Tens of thousands of cameras across the country serving thousands of cities, 1 million crimes cleared a year. I know you're very specific on saying crimes cleared rather than crimes solved. Drones arriving on scene faster than a patrol car ever could, and a new product called Nova that knits together law enforcement records with public data in ways that would have seemed like science fiction not too long ago. And going along with that, an $8.4 billion valuation with what you described as 100 billion of opportunity still to go. So my question is, what does it actually take to keep innovating at that pace while also scaling a company of this size? And maybe what part of the future roadmap excites you the most right now?
One of our early employees, who's one of our first engineers, asked me the question not too long ago. It must be kind of fun now. Like we're like a bigger company. We have more people. We have more resources. Probably take him like a step back, right? And I was like, John, I feel like I'm working harder than ever. Every single time we decide to launch a new product, enter a new market, expectations just go up. The pressure just goes up. Maybe it gets easier at some point, but it seems to me that things actually just get harder and your goals just get bigger. For me, the thing that's continued to be the grounding truth is the support network that I'm very privileged to have between my family, my coworkers, our investors. And I think for me, I got this conviction that if we're successful, this is going to sound way bigger than maybe I should say, the American dream will continue. And I know that sounds crazy, but let me provide an alternative version of history. In an environment where hundreds of thousands of kids don't feel safe, they're not going to go to school, they're not going to get a job, they're not going to start a company, they're not going to progress their livelihood above their parents. And that is effectively the beauty of what makes America a great place to live, is that there's this core belief that you can do better than your parents. You can live a bigger, fuller life. And if you look at other countries that have failed to maintain that, safety is one of the first things that goes. Because once you lose safety, you lose that economic development, you lose that thought of mobility because you're just worried about freaking being safe. And that's a lot more important than whether you have a job or whether it's a job that's better than your parents or worse than your parents or whether you're providing for your family. And so I guess it's that conviction that if we are successful, everyone has a chance to be prosperous. And it doesn't matter where you were born, like whether you're in one part of a city or another, or one city or the other, if everyone has that equal level of safety, we all have a chance to dream for what we might be able to do. So I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but that's actually the conviction I have. And it's what allows me to keep going every day. And like we're 10 years in and I can see another 10 years ahead of me and I have a roadmap for the things I want to go build. And it's exciting. It's a really, really fun space to be in.
Don't think that's crazy at all. I really appreciate that perspective. There's something you said in particular about providing your kids a better life. I'm a father of three. I know you are as well. I heard you give an interview recently as a quick sidebar about you love making breakfast for your kids every day and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And that's also my job. I do the morning routine and take my kids to school, and I never miss that. But I grew up pretty modest in rural Ohio, kind of place that got leveled by globalization. And I feel like I'm often defining a better life as material means. But you're saying it in a way that I haven't really put at the front of my mind, which is maybe giving a better life is keeping people safe. Because if you can't be safe, then you have nothing else.
To your point, I also grew up with very modest means, but I never felt unsafe.
Yeah, same.
The sad reality is that there are many cities in this country, many kids who grow up, and that's not their reality. And I think when I look at a lot of the people who disagree with what I do, they grew up like you and me. Safety was never a concern, and it is still not a concern. And that's not who I'm building for. We're building for the communities where safety is a problem, and it's a real acute problem. And I think about parts of Atlanta where I live, it's pretty normal that there's a homicide every single weekend. That's horrible. That shouldn't be the case. That should not be normal and okay.
Oof. This is almost hard to say that I feel like we've normalized violence in this country to the point where my wife and I, we were living overseas. We came back to the country during COVID, and the number one concern, most people don't believe me when I say this, the number one thing we talked about moving home was fear of safety for our kids.
Yep.
I do want to double click on something. You said people who don't agree with you. You've had the success, but your growth has come with a lot of scrutiny. ACLU has been vocal. Some cities have canceled contracts. There's lawsuits. The use of flock by immigration enforcement agencies has alarmed some people. And you've pushed back hard, including in an email that several police chiefs publicly criticized. But you've also acknowledged that this work does raise genuinely hard questions, right? We've hinted at it already in this episode. One example you've given in particular is camera placement. If a city has a limited budget, do you put cameras where crime data says they will be most effective? Or do you spread them out evenly, which is cleaner and more democratic, but maybe less effective? So, how do you lead through this tension? How do you hold the line on your principles when the pressure to maximize effectiveness is constant? The criticism is coming from many directions. And some of it, though not all of it, might be legitimate.
The first thing you have to do is you have to bucket the people who disagree with us into two broad buckets. Look at the group like ACLU. A ton of respect for them. They challenge us, they push us to be a better company, and they do it in the constructs of the democratic system that has worked for the last couple hundred years. We spar with them at the legislative level. But what we agree on, though, is that everyone deserves to be safe and that regulation in the space is actually the most important thing. And now we disagree on some of the nuances of that regulation. For instance, we agree as two different entities that this data should not live forever. It should have a expiration period. We think it should be around 30 days. My customers think it should be a year. ACLU thinks it should be maybe a couple hours or a couple days. But we're on the same wavelength that this data should exist and it just has to have an expiration period. And what we're going to do is we're going to let the people who were democratically elected to represent their constituents make the final call. It should be somewhere between a couple days and a year. And it is perfectly okay if that's different by every city, every county, and every state, because that's actually how our government works in America. So we disagree on some of the nuance, but we agree that people should be safe and we agree that regulation is good. And so we welcome and support regulation in every single state. I think this year alone, we've had 9 new bills passed. We like some more than others, but we like all of them more than no regulation. I like that. The group that I struggle with is the group that just says flock should not exist. And I'm like, okay, what is your alternative solution to the problem? Or do you not agree there's a problem? And that part is the part that I have a hard time reconciling because I just don't think that's a very American approach. Last year alone, we helped return over 10,000 missing peoples. It's adults, seniors, kids. You can't debate that. I show you the data. So we're clearly doing something. And the ACLU's point is, let's do it better. And I'm like, cool, great. But the group that just vandalizes a camera, you're now breaking the law. That part I don't have a lot of energy for relative to my good colleagues at the ACLU.
So then maybe in a productive way, what would you say that your critics misunderstand the most And what is it that you would want to say to them here today?
This has been tested in court. Uneducated critics would say, oh, this is a violation of the Constitution. And you're welcome to have that as a personal opinion. But again, we have a judicial system that's worked for a long time. And in 17 cases alone in the last 2 years, the implementation of license plate recognition has proved to be fully constitutional. That's one. I think the second is that there's this belief that we can't give law enforcement this powerful technology, they'll abuse it. And I go, man, you're willing to give this person a gun, but you don't want to give them a camera that reads the license plate. What it gets down to, though, is just a lack of trust.
Yeah.
And so when I've really spent time probing these people, it eventually gets down to, let me ask you a question. Do you believe the police chief of your town serves your best interests? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, well, then your problem is actually not with me. Your problem is with the system. Your problem is with law enforcement in general, and particularly the police chief and the agency that you are supported by. And I actually can't fix that. If you grew up thinking the police were out to get you, the current system is out to get you, yeah, I'm an extension of that then. I am a tool they will use, but that's it. The last thing that I would just hit on is, and this is tough, we believe as a company, it's not our job to write laws. It's not our job to pick which laws we think are good and bad. And so for me, on a personal level, there are plenty of laws in Georgia that I disagree with. But I vote for a governor, I vote for a lieutenant governor, I vote for attorney general to decide what laws are enforced, what laws are written, and what laws are removed. I don't think it's Flock's job to articulate like, oh, we don't like that one, we like this one. And so when the topic of immigration enforcement comes up, I'm like, guys, the company has no opinion on this. If the state of Texas wants to enforce immigration, they might use Flock, but they're going to go enforce immigration no matter what Flock does. And that's the state of Texas's choice. That's the city's choice. And it's tough, right? It's really tough for my employees to work at a company where they're like, oh, I don't like that law, but our technology is used to enforce it. But we can't make that our problem as a company. We need to let the system that's worked continue working to refine what as a society we deem illegal or legal.
Seems like people are mistrusting a tool, but really they're mistrusting the people who are using it.
Yeah.
And those are generally elected officials with accountability to public. It's not about demonizing a tool. It's about electing the right people, having a system of accountability where the use of these tools reflect what the public wants.
I think what I've realized is people have predisposed positions, beliefs about society, about trust, about the government. And they're just looking for information to validate that hypothesis. They're not actually looking for information to inform themselves about what's reality. And I get it. That's what the internet has made so easy, is to find a group of people that have the same beliefs as you. And all you hear is the same thing echoing. But it's hard to figure out what the truth is in that case.
I know it's tough. I know you've been in the news a lot lately, and I appreciate your perspective. Thank you for sharing it with us. I'd like to switch gears if we could. I want to talk about your hometown. You've been very intentional about not just building in Atlanta, but actively trying to strengthen the founder community there. You've talked about the camaraderie that's developed among the city's tech founders, the work to convince talented people at the big institutions that it's okay to leave those companies and start out on the entrepreneurial path. You've deliberately kept Flock in Atlanta, saying it would be disingenuous for you to build the company somewhere else. Numerous guests on this show have described the constraints imposed on building big tech companies in these less mature ecosystems. But perhaps surprising potentially is that it's what made these companies better, more resilient, creative, and innovative, that perceived weaknesses are actually the strengths. So I'm curious, has that been true for you? What have been the advantages or disadvantages of building in Atlanta?
Probably the biggest benefit is how big we could get before anyone knew we existed. We didn't really have a competitor until we were probably 100 million of ARR. If you're in a place like the Bay Area or New York, word's just going to get out that this company's ripping, and someone's going to be like, I don't know if I do that. So I think that's one. I think the other big advantage is, I think if you live in a city like San Francisco or New York, you tend to just like circle around the popular problems. And I think it's really hard to find unique problems. And I would say like crime is a pretty unique one. So you don't want to building products for startups. You end up building products for really big companies. That's all we have as a customer base here, right? You're going to go figure out what are Home Depot's and Coke's and UPS's problems, Fiserv problems, NCR problems, not insert or startup. So I think those are the two biggest positives. I think the negatives are probably quite obvious, being like access to capital, access to talent. But on the flip side, I was having lunch with the founder of Stripe, John Collison, and we were talking about recruiting. And I was like, what are some of the things you've learned over the years? And he's like, Garrett, the biggest mistake we made, we really only recruited from Stanford for like the first 5 years. And we realized there's some really smart people that didn't go to Stanford. And I'm like, huh, because in the Valley, they talk about this, like, you have to find these people before they're discovered, right? You have to find these people at the bottom of their intercept with a steep slope. And I guess the positive way to spin that for a place like Atlanta is everyone looks like that. No one has an assumption. Like early on, we hired a ton of our sales team from Kennesaw State. And people were like, why aren't you hiring them from Georgia Tech? And I'm like, have you ever met someone from Kennesaw State? They're incredibly smart. They're working their tail off because they went to Kennesaw State. They didn't start their career 6 feet ahead. And they actually have a really good sales program. So we hired a lot of kids from there, like 21 years old, right out of college, knew how to sell. They wanted to sell. They would work their butts off. And I think about our first two sales reps, they were with me for 5 years at the company. They would have never gotten a job at a pick your Silicon Valley thing because they went to a college that no one would have ever heard of in California. But when you're in Atlanta, you're like, all right, Kennesaw State's great. SCAD's great. Georgia State's great. Feels like a negative when you're trying to build a company in recruiting, but then you meet these special people. Like I think about our first sales leader we hired, helped us take the company from 5 million of ARR to over 500 million of ARR. You know how rare it is for a sales leader to do that? It never happens. And you look at this guy's resume and you go, that guy's not going to do it. It's like, apparently he could. I'll put that in the middle of a little bit of a negative, a little bit of a positive, because all you have is diamonds in the rough.
I agree with that. It's proven out over and over. If you actually look at the data, there are a lot more successful tech companies outside of the Bay Area than inside of it. They just don't have the household brand name associated with it. Sticking with Atlanta, beyond Flock, you launched the Thriving Cities Fund. You're putting 10 million into small Atlanta businesses, all rooted in this belief that jobs are the bedrock of safe communities. Totally agree. For founders who've come up outside the traditional hubs, giving back to the ecosystem that shaped them seems to come pretty naturally. It's something that people talk a lot about on this show. It's a continuing theme. So what are you trying to change about the opportunity structure in Atlanta for founders, for small business owners, and for the next generation of people who might otherwise assume, as you once did, that what you do is you just go get a job instead of starting a company?
You think about where Flock sits today, we're right in the middle of, let's call it the crime epidemic. And then we're in the middle of the process. By the time Flock's involved, a crime has already occurred, which is bad. That means there is both a criminal and a victim. I don't believe people are evil. I think 99.9% of criminals are good people that have made bad decisions. We would like to make sure that the case gets cleared, but we would prefer if crime never happened in the first place. Our goal is not to just solve every crime. Our goal is to eliminate it from happening. And so to do that, you have to go to the start and say, why does someone choose to be a criminal? And they choose to do that because they need this way to make money. They believe they will get away with it, and it is a profitable venture. So we focus on those two things and say we need to create jobs then that are more profitable and safer. And so when I look at Thriving Cities, it stemmed from one of the programs we have in Atlanta is this program called the At Promise Centers. It's a really good idea. It's done really good work for the city. And the thing I'd point out is what they provide is exactly what we're trying to do through Thriving Cities, which is more jobs. So that when you're 13, you're 15, you're 18, and you're making decisions about your life, there is one staring in front of you that says you can go get a good job that pays well, that provides stability. But if you don't see that, you believe your only choice is crime. I will steal, I'll rig into cars. And so, yeah, it's something that's like really important to us. I'm a capitalist. I think economic development is the engine that drives our society. You can't do that if you're not safe. But once you are safe, that's, I think, how you stay safe.
Totally agree. And I love the action that you're taking to make a difference across that broader spectrum. I want to ask one more question about your leadership, not just in the ecosystem, but within your company. I know that you've been very open about culture, how you lead the company, detail oriented, hands on. I know your co founder, Paige, worked on cultural norms with Ben Horowitz, wrote one of my favorite books of all time on culture, which is What You Do Is Who You Are. Talked about that numerous times on this show. Every new hire gets a 90-day plan instead of a job description, just a very unique way of setting culture and beginning that experience for new employees. So, for founders in our audience who are starting to scale, what have you learned about making culture explicit before the company gets big enough to potentially distort it?
When I was having this conversation with Ben, we were probably 100 people. They had just invested in the business and we were adding a lot of people. And he had asked me, like, how's the culture at Flock? And I was like, oh, Ben, it's really good. And he's like, great. Can you send it to me? I was like, no, I can't send it to you. It's like a feeling. You gotta feel what it's like to work at Flock. And he was like, that's actually not true. It means you have a very weak culture. And his point was not that it necessarily has to be weak, but that means that the nucleus of this energy is you and Paige. The bigger you get, the weaker that's actually going to be because the employees are 4 layers from you, 5 layers from you, more than one, which means it decays really fast. So the absence of a written document means that you as an individual are the only source of culture, and that's actually not going to work. And that was like tough to hear because I thought I'd built a pretty cool company at the time. And Andreessen Horowitz had just invested. Oh my gosh. And Ben's like, no, man, your culture sounds not good. So but we wrote it down and took it to heart. And even to this day, every week, Paige and I walk our new employees through those cultural norms and what it means to be at Flock. And the whole point we make is that our culture is not good or bad. We don't believe in yelling at Flock. I can think of a lot of really good companies where yelling is quite normal. And that's okay. We just don't yell. We have all these things about what we believe to be true or to be good at Flock, but we remind people this doesn't have to be for you, but this is how we work. And every single employee sits through the exact same meeting, signs the exact same cultural norms, and agrees that they will continue to be a shepherder of this culture. And that means that actually the energy goes throughout the entire organization. And so we have a lot of beliefs that we think work really well for us. I don't think they work everywhere. Like if you look at my executive team, 3/4 of them have been with me since we were sub 1 million of ARR. Really rare. I think every VC I've ever talked to is like, you got to upgrade your exec team every 18 months. And I haven't. And I think there's a lot that we do different. And I think some of it maybe makes us a better company. Maybe some of it makes us a worse company. But the thing that I remind our team is every one of you will probably go on to work at another company. I'm not hireable. So I got to go make sure we're building a company that I love. And then I got to hope that there's enough other people in this world that like the way that I like to work, that they want to come work here. And so we've kept a pretty tight, focused culture in that regard. And while I'm very receptive to feedback and we evolve the culture for sure, what it never leaves from is a place that Paige and I are really proud to work at.
Speaking of people being around you for a long period of time, you built a pretty intentional support system around the realities of running a high growth company. A lot of it seems designed to protect your family life from the stress of that job. I know you've said that the biggest risk to success as a CEO isn't the business, it's your personal life, causing an outsized amount of stress. Your wife, Megan, has been a constant through all of this. After your experience at Experience, you were figuring out what was next, playing a lot of golf, and she encouraged you to go back to building because you're a builder. On the other hand, she said she also can see when something stressful is going on at work because you don't sleep and you're not a lot of fun to be around. So, on that personal note, what does she see in you that your employees and investors might not get to have a window into? And when you look honestly at what it takes to build a company at the scale of Flock with the critics, with the breadth of activity, how have you tried to keep that ambition for the company from taking more from your family than it gives back?
I'll maybe answer the last question first and then go backwards. I think in moments in time, and maybe we're in with us right now, the company takes way more than it gives back. Nowhere near a balance. And the way my wife and I try to rationalize that is It's just chapters in a long book. Not every chapter is going to be fun. Not every chapter is going to be happy. Not every chapter is going to be a success. But as long as you like the bookends and you enjoy the characters, it's going to be a really good book. So we try not to get too bogged down on what one individual chapter feels like. And there are plenty of chapters, like to your description of the series B, that's not a chapter that I plan to go reread very often. But she was there with me through it, and she was the one saying, "You will be fine. We will finish this chapter and you will like the next chapter." And I think more than anything, she continues to kind of be that eternal optimist that if I work hard enough, if I believe in what I'm doing, the good guys will win in the long run. So then go to your original question, think if you were to survey my average employee base, they would probably articulate that they think I have this endless fountain of optimism. And what I think that they would not understand is that actually stems from my wife. She has what feels like an eternal optimism for me and what I can accomplish. And that's actually where I'm stealing it from, because I go through my highs and lows, but she's the one who kind of keeps me balanced and focused.
It's a nice testament. Thankfully, I feel the same about my wife. I know it's not easy for anyone, and I know you've still got a lot of building, a lot of work to do, but I do kind of want to end asking about legacy, which seems especially important in this case. The company you're building from home in Atlanta, it's now valued at over $8 billion. We've talked about the impact. We've talked about the numbers, but I don't really get a sense that's why you're in it. So when it's all said and done, when your kids are old enough to really understand what you've built and why you've built it, what do you hope that Flock will have proven about safety, about Atlanta, and about what's possible when you build something that actually matters?
If we fast forward some number of years, 5, 7, 3 on the optimistic side, there will be these cities. We call them safe cities. And crime will be something talked about like fax machines, where, yeah, that made sense. That kind of existed, but no one really talks about it anymore. And what I hope they will take away from that is when I'm criticized by some people, they're like, "Oh, you've simplified the problem too much. Technology can't actually fix this problem. Technology isn't enough. You can't just solve crime. It's not how it works." And those are the people that also have no plan either to fix it. And they argue that the thing is just too big. And what I hope in our success we're able to show is that just because the problem is complicated doesn't mean the solution has to be complicated. And you look at some of the things facing this country today, crime being one of them, we can devise simple solutions. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can use common sense. And I think if that is what my kids learn, maybe other people learn, that you can pick the hairiest of societal problems, think about it really hard, get a smart group of people together and commit a decade plus of their life to fixing it, then it can work. And if we can build that level of optimism, I think we can look at all the problems we face as a community and just start knocking them off one by one.
That's a great sentiment. It's a nice way to end. We're almost out of time, but before I let you go, we like to finish with a little segment we call Beyond the Bio, which is just some quick hit questions to go beyond the resume and just dig into what makes you you. Sound okay?
Yep.
Okay. What's a quick piece of advice from a mentor that stuck with you throughout your journey?
Team first.
Who is an unsung hero in your life and what has been the impact they've had on you?
My brother. He forces me to have fun. Without him, I would never have fun.
That's great. I haven't heard that one before. Who's someone in the Atlanta startup community who doesn't get enough credit and deserves a shout out from you?
Okay, good guy. Scott Voigt runs a company called Full Story. OG, been around a long time, a dear friend, and someone I leaned on really heavily the first few years of Flock.
Tell us something most people don't know about you, something outside of work, could be a hobby, a favorite travel spot, a guilty pleasure, or maybe even a hidden talent.
During COVID, I went vegan for a full year, and I can share, I looked the exact same. I felt better. It was a lot more work, a whole lot more work, but I feel quite strongly that our current food system is killing us, and we need to rethink the food we put in our bodies.
So you're still vegan.
No, I went back because I was like, this takes too much time. I went back to all the bad stuff because it was too much work to be vegan, but I did it for a year.
I feel like it would be too hard for me to give up pizza. That's my guilty pleasure, maybe.
Cheese is so good.
Yeah. What are one or two songs you'd like to add to our Spotify Founders playlist? Something that fuels your workday or has inspired you on your journey as an entrepreneur?
Oh man, the XX on hold. It's a really good one. I've always loved the XX. I saw them for the first time ever at South by Southwest in Austin many, many years ago. And that's probably the band I've seen the most live. And then this is going to be, I'm a sucker for like a good pop song. I think every single song that Olivia Rodrigo makes is just like great.
Okay.
Some music makes you cry. Some music makes you smile. You kind of got to have both in your playlist.
Great. We're going to add those. What about a book you'd recommend? Maybe something that has been especially valuable on your journey, or maybe one that you think every first-time founder should read as they're getting started?
There's a handful that are worth reading, but it's worth studying ancient Egypt. And it's not intuitive why. One, I think it's actually really fascinating. But what I think is more important is it gives you a new sense for time. Because you think about the ancient Egyptians, they existed for thousands of years before the Romans. And we think of Romans as that's ancient history, right? That's 2,000 years ago. The Egyptians were there 5,000 years before them. And so when you're a founder, right, you're like, man, I got to every day, I got to hit numbers every quarter, every year. And you think about, oh, I want to build this generational company. America's not even that old. America's only a couple hundred years old.
Yeah.
So you start to understand, what were they doing? Why were they so successful? How could they survive so long as this dominant society? So I think that's like a really understudied, underread ancient history. And I've read a bunch of books on it. I think it's a ton of fun.
I hadn't thought of that perspective. Is there like a specific one that would be the best to kind of dig in on that subject?
So there's a really good biography on Cleopatra as a starting point. It's a fun read because Cleopatra had a fascinating life in her short span on this earth, but it does delve into a bit of the history of Egypt. And if you find that book interesting, you'll naturally jump to what was it like before Cleopatra, 1,000 years before, 2,000 years before? What was the first pharaoh like? What was that evolution into pharaohs, into treating them like godlike figures? There's so much to learn, and it spans thousands of years.
It's amazing. Great one. All right, last question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's about to start their first company, particularly someone who's maybe a bit of an outsider, what would it be?
At the end of the day, you'll build a company that no one can ignore. And so don't worry about where you're based. Don't worry about the ecosystem. Don't worry about investors, because eventually you'll build a company and they will all come to you.
Can't think of a better way to end. Garrett, thank you so much for sharing your time today, your wisdom. I cannot wait to share this episode with our listeners.
Awesome. Thanks.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Outsider Inc. A big thank you to Garrett Langley for joining us and sharing his journey and wisdom. What stays with me most from this conversation isn't the $8.4 billion valuation or the 6,000 cities or even the 1 million crimes cleared a year. It's the framing. Garrett doesn't talk about Flock as an honor. He talks about it as a burden he chooses to carry every day alongside 2,000 people who could be building something far easier. There's something deeply inspiring in that. He built in Atlanta because leaving would have been disingenuous. He went into a market that nearly every investor told him was a mistake: hardware, government, law enforcement, and got within weeks of running out of money before the results got too good to ignore. And underneath all of it is a conviction most founders never have to articulate: that safety isn't a privilege, it's a right. And without it, the whole American promise of doing better than your parents quietly falls apart. For the outsiders listening, don't worry about where you're based or who's writing checks. Build something no one can ignore, and eventually, they'll come to you. If you want more from Outsider Inc., don't forget to subscribe to the platform at outsiderinc.substack.com. It's packed with highlights from today's episode and bonus insights you won't want to miss. You can follow Outsider Inc. on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Outsider Inc. Pod. You can also follow me on X at Ian Hathway. Outsider Inc. is produced by Spellbinder Media. We'll be back soon with another fascinating outsider conversation. Until then, thank you so much for listening. And remember, great entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. See you next time.